Hi, welcome back to the Patient First Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan, where I am teaching dentists to be more profitable by putting the patient first. And today we have one of my favorite topics, a recurring segment, if you will, where we take a number, a fact, a metric, if you will, and we dive deep into that metric, how it affects your practice, what's going on in the world today, and of course, we like to call it KDI, or the key dental indicator. What's going on in dentistry today, how our numbers are being affected, and what we can do about it, how we can sort of shift things around to make our numbers work for us, not against us. It's a big passion of mine. If you know of the product abundance that I'm part of, it's all about making profit simple, making numbers easy, and I love numbers. So I think that it's a key part of our business. And so let's dive into it and do some math. Let's do some math on a key indicator that we have for you today, which comes from our friend Bob Affleck over at Citibank, where Bob said to me, which kind of makes sense, but as you'll see as we dig deep into it, I think we're failing in some practices, that a dentist should make 30 to 35% of your collection. So for every dollar that comes into the practice, a dentist should make 30 to 35%. And if you think about it, and if you're an associate, you're probably hopefully making somewhere between 30 and 35%. So what does that mean if you're an owner of a practice, or how does that affect you as an associate if you should make 30 to 35% of your collections? Now, we are not average here at the Patient First Podcast. We are excellent, or at least above middle grade, I hope, because you're watching a podcast, you're an engaged member of our dental community. So I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to put you at the very, very top of that list. Let me share my screen here, and I'm down in the corner. And so you're at the top of that list. So what does that mean? That means that you, my friend, are making 35% of your collections as profit, right? And yes, you can tell by my handwriting, I am a dentist. My handwriting is horrible. One of the major reasons why I switched to digital charts, not only is my handwriting is probably horrible because I actually, I'm too impatient to write. But so you're making 35% of your collections, right? So you're a happy dentist, you're doing a good job. And let's say you're collecting $1 million a year as your production, what you do that you collect on, right? Well, that seems pretty good, right? And there's probably a lot of people thinking right now, hey, I'm above average. I get 35% of my collections and I collect $1 million. So, I'm top of the heap. So what would that mean? Let's do a little math. So 1 million times 35% is $350,000 per year. So you're making $350,000 a year if you collect $1 million and you take home 35% of that. Now, maybe some of you had an aha here, and I did sort of midway in my career, because I thought I was a high producer, high collection rate, and I had high profitability. And then I looked at the numbers and I went, well, these numbers don't add up. I am not making $350,000 a year. And maybe some of you had that experience right now. So what does that mean? That means go back and check your numbers, because the math isn't wrong. Math is factual, right? So either you're not collecting $1 million or you're not as profitable as you thought you were. And, if you are, then maybe you're getting $400,000 a year off $1 million of collections. Well, good for you. You're a rock star and you're above average, right? But I think that there's a lot of people that are not in this boat. But what I really want to focus on here is not necessarily this math of 35%. What I want to focus on is, let's say, the fact that your hygiene team may have come to you and said, it's time for a raise. 10% of the profession has left. I'm more valuable than ever before. I deserve a raise. And then your assistant does too. And most your team does, which, by the way, is about 50% of your average of your expenses in your practice. Your wages go up. Then your supply bill goes up because right now, the business to business inflation is at its highest rate since the mid 70s. So inflation business to business is incredibly high, and commodity. So your water, your gas, all the commodities in your practice, that inflation rate has never been higher in the history of the United States. The inflation rate on commodities has never been higher. So inflation is bazonkers right now. At the time when lots of insurance companies are magically reducing reimbursements. Bonkers. Record inflation, and the insurance are dropping, are radically reducing reimbursements. And I hear lots of dentists dropping insurances because they're probably doing some math, is my guess. So if any of that sounds familiar, what's probably happening right now is that you're probably getting about 10% increase in your expenses, which would be actually probably kind of low. So for an average practice producing $1 million, these are expenses. You pay about half of your expenses that are going to go up, so that's $500,000, right? And if you get increase of 10% on inflation, right, then that means you have an extra $50,000 in expenses a year. Now, if my math is wrong, if I'm going off track, please comment. If you like what I'm doing, subscribe. But if my math is wrong, certainly comment. I am doing this sort of stream of consciousness, so I could certainly be getting something wrong, but I think we're at least directionally correct. But if I made a mistake, certainly let me know. So $50,000 of extra expenses. So now it goes straight from this, obviously. So that $350,000 that you're bringing home is now, minus. So you're making $300,000 a year instead of $350,000. Boo-hoo for you. And that's kind of going on right now all over the country in dental practices. But what I want to make note of is that is actually 15% less income, right? So you're making 15% less than you did because your expenses went up 10%. And what's shocking is if you are making less, or if you're less profitable, that is probably worse, because if you are making $150,000 a year, let's draw a line here, off of, because either your collections aren't as high, or particularly if your profitability isn't as high, your expenses will still go up, but it will dig into this more, right? So if you had $50,000, let's say that because you're making less, you collect less, you have less expenses, right? So when your expenses get hammered, you might, instead of having $50,000 of reduction in your, or $50,000 increase in your expenses, let's say you have $30,000, right? So now you're making $120,000 instead. Well, that means that you, my friend, just had 20% of your income taken away. That is obviously 5% more. So if you today have less collections or less profitability, the chances is that you are actually more vulnerable than somebody that was doing better before the pandemic. And again, this is a rock star, in my opinion. A dentist that's collecting $1 million and making 35%, or making $350,000 a year, about 3 times the national average, is obviously doing very well. So I think the average dentist here is very vulnerable to some profit compression, some loss of income. And that's really what I'm concerned about right now. So that key dental indicator from our friend from Dental Coach USA and Citibank, Bob Affleck, I thank you very much for that, Bob. But I think it led us down the path where I want to just highlight some math, what we want to be aware of, and what we can do about it. I think is a lot. There's a lot that we can do to increase our profitability. We can automate things, a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast. And of course, that I go through in the Insanely Productive Dentist, or like we like to call it over here, IPD, which we've just had some phenomenal testimonials and people who have gone through our first cohort of dentists. We have we're about halfway through, a little bit more than halfway through the first phase of IPD, where we're going through the Insanely Productive Dentist, the Insanely Productive Operatory we just finished. Now we're in the Insanely Productive Office. And then my favorite topic, what we kind of touched on today, which is wage compression and team mastery. How do you keep wages down in this environment? It's wacky, crazy inflation right now. And I think that it is time for dentists to focus on profitability. Let's face it, we were kind of fat and happy for a long time with profits of around 30 to 35%, like a lot of businesses. And now that has kind of come and the tide has turned. I believe dentists are it's taking longer to retire. They're making less. Let's do what we can to turn that around so that we can actually invest in our practices, get the technology, get the team, so that we can put the patient first. So go to upgradedental.com if you want to learn more. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again right here on the Patient First podcast.